Everything good to go? It looks like.
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, let me check the vault.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Ritt. I'm the outreach coordinator and undergrad advisor for the Latin American Caribbean and Iberian Studies program. Just wanted to welcome you all today. Thanks for coming to our lecture. In the back, you'll notice there's some snacks, coffee, and tea. Please help yourself. Also, we have a sign-in sheet for our listserv. If you're not already on our listserv, we send out a weekly email blast with announcements about all of our events, as well as other things happening on campus and around Madison. There's also some handouts for some other upcoming events that we are sponsoring, as well as a handout with the rest of the lectures for this semester. We've had a few new updates to that recently, if you haven't picked one up lately. So thanks so much again for coming. I'll turn it over to Elder Samara, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. My pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Brendan Lula. Brendan is a student in the ethnomusicology program here at UW, and it's always a pleasure for us to receive students who have gotten Tinker-Nave grants and that are doing programs in the field so that they can come back and tell us what they've done. This talk is sponsored by the Brazilian Initiative, the Division of International Studies and Latin. And I am also very happy to hear Brendan telling us about this program, because I was involved in the formation of a program. It's called the Network, Brazil-US Network on Environment, Society, and Governance. And this is a program that we started with the University of Colorado in Boulder, and also involved USP, and also the University in Maranhão, the Federal University in Maranhão, and later Indiana University and University of Kansas also joined the network. So this has been a collaborative endeavor. And we were fortunate to go to San Luis Maranhão a few years ago and participated in a conference. But lucky for us that we were there at the time of the Western Union. And that's one of the most impressive events that I attended, and I was happy to hear that Brendan was interested in this topic. So with this network, we connected with our colleagues there, Maricela Andrade and husband Benedito, who sort of kind to host Brendan's work. So thank you for being here, Brendan, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. Yeah, and Marcela and Benedito were really, without their help, they were extremely hospitable that they let me use their home until I could find a place to stay for myself, and introduced me to a lot of people. So much of this is thanks to them. So. And I should stress, I should also say that I used the Tinker-Nave funding for a month in the field. So this is all very new, and both my ideas and just my knowledge it's a work in progress. So I just appreciate all of your comments and questions at the end to help me develop this. Maranhão is a land of enchantment. No, this is not the Maranhense Ministry of Tourism's advertising slogan, but rather a commonly used phrase by Maranhenses themselves to describe the varying types of magic, myth, and religious practice that are important markers of the state for its citizens. Enchantment, religious symbology, and myths as popular ways of knowing and seeing the world take center stage in the cultural manifestations of Maranhão as well. The importance of music traditions in the negotiation of Maranhense cultural identity evokes the root meaning of the word enchantment from the Latin words to sing and into. In a sense, is the practice of these musical cultural traditions themselves that enchant the land as they renew the myths and ideas that set it apart as distinct and special, worthy of local pride and foreign interest. As such, dance and music traditions that once were performed primarily as recreation and social commentary have been reframed over several decades of tourist development into popular spectacles and sites for marginalized populations, as well as middle-class Maranhenses, to demonstrate their cultural citizenship. Bumbumel Boy, an intricate theater, dance, and music complex, and this here is a masquerade called Kazumba, that is one of the religious symbols of Bumbu Boy, and tambor de crioula, and this is, you see, a drummer playing the tambor grande, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and a dancer here. Tambor de crioula, which is a circle dance with clear African heritage. Both have become performed and celebrated by members of a variety of regional and class-defined subgroups within Maranhão. As the Brazilian Constitution, written in 1988 after the end of the Brazilian dictatorship, explicitly marked culture as a right for all citizens, a number of government initiatives have and continue to both provide resources to and encourage cultural, to both provide resources to encourage cultural development, as well as use culture as a political resource. In addition, corporations and NGOs are currently working in Maranhão to organize festivals, performances, and other opportunities for participation in cultural performances. To do this, they both draw upon the knowledge of and ostensibly better the lives of marginalized populations. During this talk, I will map out some of the interactions between the state, private corporations and NGOs, and performers from different socioeconomic groups in the capital city of São Luís. Based on my own research, including an initial exploratory trip to Maranhão that I conducted this winter, I will point to some of the routes of inquiry that I plan to take as I continue to develop this project. The term Cultura Popular appears not only in academic publications in Maranhão, but on the tongues of singers performing newly created toadas or call and response songs, setting the boy and his entourage or the twirling tambor dancers into motion. Viva a cultura popular do Maranhão is a common refrain for participants in a variety of cultural forms, also including the Brazilian martial art capoeira, the localized form of samba, but especially tambor de crioula and Bumbu Boy. This local understanding of popular culture comes largely from the work of Sergio Ferretti, a Brazilian anthropologist who has worked in the field of syncretism and Afro-Brazilian culture for the better part of his 40-year career at the Federal University of Maranhão. Ferretti, echoing Nestor Garcia Conclini's discussion of popular culture in Latin America, put forward in the 70s and 80s a notion of Maranhense cultura popular as a space between the folkloric, which he argued was a primary label attached to the culture of the lower classes, and mainstream popular music and entertainment. Much of Ferretti's work is concerned with the recognition that the populations that have maintained these traditions throughout Brazilian history have been and continue to be marginalized and impoverished. This is despite the recent recognition of the value of their cultural contributions. Around that same time, mainly in the 70s and the early 80s, community organizations such as Labor Arte, who we see here, this is a tambor de crioula class that this group, Labor Arte, puts on weekly, began performing shows and giving classes in music, dance, capoeira, and other cultural forms as a way to foment interclass participation and further develop a distinctly Maranhense popular culture. While Labor Arte and other groups advocating for popular culture were not overtly political, their use of these traditions implied a critique against the status quo and even the dictatorship, especially the marginalization of poor Brazilians of native and African descent in the Northeast. More recently, Conclini has complicated this notion of the popular as a distinction between what is popular or from the popular classes and what is not, instead framing it as a constant negotiation. He states, quote, "The culturally hybrid features resulting from cross-class interaction force us to recognize that alongside struggle, there is also negotiation. Negotiation is located within collective subjectivity, in the most unconscious culture of politics and daily life. Its hybrid character, which in Latin America derives from a long history of mixtures and syncretisms, is accentuated in contemporary societies through complex interactions between the traditional and the modern, the popular and the elite, the subaltern and the hegemonic." In her formulation of cultural citizenship, Aiwa Ong critiques the overtly simplistic model that has been used in the past, in which culture serves as a means for inclusion in the nation for marginalized populations. In other words, other people are actually included upon the merit of the otherness of their culture. Instead, like Conclini, she posits an ongoing negotiation between the state and the subject based on the culture and race socially created race of marginalized subjects, such as immigrants or other racial minorities, to determine the contours of citizenship for these groups. I'm currently working towards mapping out these types of negotiation between the state and other powerful sectors with some of the poor racialized populations of Maranhão in using their culture both as a means of enrichment of the state and a means for their inclusion in its cultural politics. The complex tradition of Bumbo Meu Boi is most frequently performed just before, during, and after the month of June, when the Catholic festivals termed the Festas Juninas, which Alberto mentioned earlier, are celebrated. Bumbo Meu Boi consists of both a complex group of musical, dance, and dramatic performances, and also an extremely detailed material culture comprised of ornate costume, masks, and musical instruments. And here we see the couro do boi, the skin of the bull, which this, you can see this has São João, and this was for 2014 for the group Boi do Maracanã. So we have the World Cup here with the, there's also the similar Maracanã is also the name of the stadium in Rio, even though in this case, Boi do Maracanã is a municipality of São Luís, of the, and then we have, of course, the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, and São João, who is the patron saint of the bull. And each of this is all a mosaic of tiny little beads. So it is a ridiculous amount of work that goes into this, months and months. By way of an introduction to Bumbo Meu Boi, I would like to briefly summarize the auto do boi, or the plot of the tradition's dramatical element. While there are many variations, here is one of the most common basic versions. Pai Francisco and Mãe Catarina are slaves in colonial era Brazil. Their master, simply known in this case as the amo do boi, owns a beautiful bull that dances and evokes songs of admiration from his owner. Yet Catarina, who is pregnant, is struck with an insatiable craving for bull tongue that can only be satisfied by the tongue of the prized bull. Francisco protests, knowing the consequences, but eventually gives in for fear that his wife's desire, for fear that if his wife's desire goes unfulfilled, their child will die. He kills the bull, and Catarina is satisfied. Once the amo finds his bull slaughtered, he sends his hired hands, called caboclos, which in this case, that word can have a variety of meanings. In this case, it mainly just means people of native Brazilian descent who have been incorporated into the plantation culture. So he sends these caboclos to apprehend whoever committed the crime. The caboclos catch Francisco and return him to the amo, who agrees that Francisco must resurrect the bull or face the consequences. After seeking the help of a doctor and a priest, both of whom were unsuccessful, Francisco is ready to face the consequences. However, before he can be punished, a group of curandeiros or pajés, which is basically just a name for indigenous healer, very generic in regional Portuguese, arrive to aid him, and they successfully revive the bull. The amo pardons Chico and declares a day of celebration for all involved. Even in this simple summary of a drama that can stretch for hours into the night, there is much to unpack. Past studies on Bumbo Meu Boi, including the seminal work of Maranhense author Américo Azevedo Neto in the 80s, and Kazaji Wamukuna, who wrote the only book-length work on the genre in English in 2003, foreground the possibility of social critique in the auto. This is primarily derived from the depiction of the amo as a fool, from the placement of Francisco as the trouble-fraught protagonist, and the pajés as the ultimate source of meaningful knowledge and power after the failure of the representatives of European religion and medicine. These valorizations of African and indigenous characters and knowledge would likely have held much meaning for the slaves, agricultural and day laborers, and domestic laborers who have maintained this tradition since the colonial era. Today, Bumbo Meu Boi groups are primarily located within poor municipalities of the state, including rural districts as well as poor urban districts, which surround the city center of São Luís. However, more recent studies, as well as the conceptions of many of the performers and organizers within Bumbo Meu Boi groups themselves, today largely see this social critique as a thing of the past. The satire likely would have been more biting when Bumbo Meu Boi and other expressions of Afro-Brazilian culture were marginalized and repressed before their development as symbols of cultural pride and attractors of tourist income. Instead, Francisco and Catarina's plight is framed as a myth of the multiracial origins of Maranhão and Brazil more broadly. After all, the play could be seen as a microcosm of the interaction of the three original races, the African, Portuguese, and native, on the plantation as petri dish that Gilberto Freire posited as the origin of Brazilian national culture. Their status as mythic symbols could also be an explanation for the frequent use of essentialized depictions of characters based on their race, including blackface for Francisco and Catarina, and depictions of Indians and Kubokus that more closely resemble Wild West films than any actual indigenous groups living in Maranhão. Besides this central myth, the boy is also a direct reference to the Maranhense reformulation of the Portuguese Sebastianist myth, in which, in this case, the long-missing 16th century Portuguese monarch who went missing during the Crusades in Morocco roams the sand dunes of the Maranhense coast, specifically the Lençóis Maranhenses, which is this really beautiful state park that's made of these undulating sand dunes interspersed with really bright blue pools of salt water. It's a big tourist attraction. He roams the sand dunes of the Maranhense coast each Friday night as an enchanted bull with a golden star on his forehead. To give you, so I want to take a little detour here. And so this is, I talked about Bumbum Meu Boi do Maracanã. This is Mestre Humberto de Maracanã and his wife Maria. Obviously that's me and my friend Fernanda, who is a dancer and researcher. And one of the most famous toadas for Bumbum Meu Boi was written by Humberto. It's also been performed by Alcione, the samba singer, if anyone knows who is from Maranhão, as well as some other groups. And as just a demonstration of kind of this, this mythical aspect, especially the Sebastianist myth, I wanted to play it really quick. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the subtitles to work when I transferred the video, so I'm going to quick get out of PowerPoint and use just VLC. I apologize. I also couldn't get. I subtitled this and I couldn't get the accents to work. So for those Portuguese speakers in here, just try to bear it. So this is actually from Boi do Maracanã has gotten a lot of government funding and a lot of outside support too. So this is their very professional a chunk I took from their very professional DVD. So, and then of course the subtitles don't work anyway, but I can just give it play-by-play. He's saying, Maranhão, my treasure, my homeland, I made this song for you. Land of the Babaçu, which that's this tree that nature cultivates. This palm tree, the natural palm tree, which gives this native palm tree, which gives me inspiration. The Lençóis Maranhenses have a enchanted bull. It is the land of King Sebastian. Basically, that's the important part. The rest of this is talking about the foods and the landscape of Maranhão. Saying in June we have Bumbum Meu Boi in praise of São João. The Amu sings and shakes the maraca. These drums make the ground shake. This is an inheritance given by our ancestors that today we cultivate to compose your history, Maranhão. I should say I wanted to include this specifically partially as a tribute because actually Humberto passed away a week after I interviewed him. Unfortunately, he was in his 70s and been doing it for 43 years, been leading this group. So, and there was a state funeral. It was a really big deal.
This is your own filming that you did?
No, this is from their professional DVD, and this is a lot better than what I could have done. And they weren't performing. There were a couple groups that did out-of-season performances, but Maracanã was not one of them. But I did interview him and spoke with them and saw the. They have a little kind of a museum attached to their sede or their community building that has artifacts, has past costumes, past performance items. So. All of these myths, however, increasingly have to coexist with an ever-growing sense of spectacle and celebration that is manifested in at least 5 recognized sotakis, or performance styles, with varying instrumentation and visual styles.
About all of our events, as well as other we are sponsoring as well as a handout with the rest of the lectures for this semester. We've had a few new updates to that recently if you haven't picked one up lately. So thanks so much again for coming. I'll turn it over to Elder Samara. She's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. My pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Brendan Lula. Brendan is a student in the ethnomusicology program here at UW, and it's always a pleasure for us to receive students who have gotten synchronized grants and that are doing programs in the field so that they can come back and tell us what they've done. This talk is sponsored by the Brazilian.
Everything good to go there? Looks like.
I think we're good, yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, let me check the vault.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Riff. I'm the outreach coordinator and undergrad advisor for the Latin American Caribbean and Iberian Studies program. Just wanted to welcome you all today. Thanks for coming to our lecture. In the back, you'll notice there's some snacks, coffee, and tea. Please help yourself. Also, we have a sign-in sheet for our listserv. If you're not already on our listserv, we send out a weekly email blast with announcements.
International Studies and Latin. And I'm also very happy to hear Brendan telling us about this program because I was involved in the formation of a program. It's called the Network, Brazil-US Network on Environment, Society, and Governance. And this is a program that we started with the University of Colorado in Boulder, and also involved USP, and also the university in Maranhão, the Federal University in